I grew up without knowing I was autistic for the longest time. Like, people treated me as if I was out of place. I didn't belong in there. And I was a very prime target for bullying.
When I'm meeting people, even if it's my close friends or if it's a stranger, I have to rehearse what I'm going to say into my head, so it's like a speech. Most people rehearse speeches for a business meeting, but to me, every day is a speech. There's no words that are just made up at the top of my head.
I haven't quite gathered my thoughts together. It's very difficult to communicate a fluid and sort of coherent sentence, despite generally being a very articulate person.
I knew I was different, and lots of other people around me knew, but
I tend to find that once I kind of get going and kind of get into my rhythm a bit, that tends to change. I start to speak much more articulately, but I do find myself sometimes a bit tongue-tied.
it makes my mind act a little differently from the way quote-unquote normal people's minds work.
I also really struggle with banter and sarcasm, and I think they're the main issues really, because most people rely on it. People rely on banter to get through the day, and I just don't understand it. To me it's like they're speaking a different language because I take everything literally.
My processing speed is probably generally slower than well, say the average person.
I always find everything's too fast-paced. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. So it could be at work or it could be just in a supermarket.
So when I find that I'm reading instructions or trying to interpret instructions, it's very difficult for me to actually absorb any of that information unless I'm focusing 100%.
I feel that everyone's on an escalator at super speed and I haven't quite got on the platform yet.
On quiz shows, I tend to find that as well, that the questions come in too fast. They happen. I would, if I was a contestant, I'd probably need to ask them to repeat the question.
I feel really inadequate as a person most of the time because I think I beat myself up a little bit and think, why can't I do it like everyone else? Why can't I do an average job and go to the supermarket without getting stressed? So I think it brings my self-esteem down.
I say I'm a generally self-controlled person, but I can go to extremes sometimes with my emotions, and when I'm feeling frustrated, it doesn't take much for me to feel quite some pretty savage emotions.
I just find everything really overwhelming, so I often get quite confused by simple instructions because my head's already full.
I can look quite sort of calm and collected. There is an intensity within me that's quite raw.
Sometimes I can feel very, very physical, so my jaw can tighten and I can get a bit short of breath. I can also feel faint and dizzy, and if my anxiety is really heightened, I almost feel like I'm not in the room because I've completely zoned out. Sometimes it feels like I'm underwater when I'm really stressed, like I'm in a pool on my own.
Well, I've struggled through a lot of my problems alone, so honestly, being alone, while it does have its privileges, it also has its downfalls because you've got no one to confide into, unfortunately.
I find that sometimes when I'm feeling anxious or worried, it's not always the advice that I'm looking for, but rather just a kind of supportive ear, a listening ear.
I am terrible at asking for help. Particularly more so about myself. If I'm asking for help about like a certain item, like I can ask that pretty easily. It's just more so about myself.
I sometimes just find it kind of frustrating when people then sort of try to help me in a way that doesn't sort of vibe with my wavelength, or in a way which isn't self-assuring, which isn't reassuring for me.
I think people having patience would be the main thing, because a lot of the time I find that people are quickly to get frustrated. I found people say that I'm an exasperating person. And also I think to explain things, I never get anything on the first communication, so it's better if someone explained things twice.
I'm not very familiar with people asking, like, are you okay? Is something wrong? But it would be nice.
There's always a sense of caution and apprehension with me when it comes to travelling independently.
I find like travelling almost impossible. I actually avoid it, and it's caused me a lot of stress socially because I just don't do it. I've had really bad experiences on trains because I've got a really poor sense of direction as well.
I found myself in a new situation with travelling on trains and taking a taxi for essentially the first time on my own, and I was my anxiety levels there were quite high because I felt thrown into a bit of a deep end there.
I often struggle. I can see a sign, but I don't understand where that sign's leading me to, and I don't know what to do. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, can't you read?" or "Oh, you're not a child, you need to work it out," or "I haven't got time to help you."
I was having to rely on the taxi driver being a nice, reasonable person, which I've come to find they normally are.
I've had situations where I've nearly lost my luggage because I've been on the other side of the platform.
It depends on the distance of the travelling. Like, small areas like from like Darlington to here or Darlington to the town centre, not a problem. If I'm travelling slightly further to places I'm not very familiar with, for example, Wolverhampton, Scotland, which I haven't been to, Scotland especially, and many places abroad, it does get me a little on edge.
I can drive, but I don't like driving in unpredictable circumstances.
Being on edge is like you're shaky, you're constantly looking around you, just like, oh god, where am I? It's one of those, it's like if you're lost in a maze, for example.
Bus-wise, I find buses hard as well because there's a whole having to plan. You've got to plan the right money and you've got to plan where you're going to get off at the bus stop. And then I think, oh, who am I going to have to sit by? And
When approaching situations for the first time, it's quite frightening for me.
I try and drive or walk. I just avoid I've even driven to London before just to avoid getting a train, which has caused me more stress and taken double the time.
I'm not really a very spontaneous person. I like to know what it is that I'm going to get out of something.
I do have trouble with forms, and I often find that I'm overwhelmed even if I've just glanced at the sheet of paper. If there's lots of questions on the page, I automatically think I can't do this, it's too overwhelming.
9 times out of 10, yes, I do find forms to be particularly difficult, especially with sort of the big fancy words they use.
My brain really struggles to organise itself, so sometimes I want to answer the questions in a different way, or I'll read the context wrong of the sentences. And I've tried to fill out forms on my own and just missed really important information out.
It's quite possible I might interpret it in a slightly different way than is intended. And also I don't interpret the information very quickly.
And then sometimes I sent it to the wrong place without a stamp on and things like that. So I find it quite overwhelming as soon as I get a form through the post. Sometimes I've even avoided opening it. If it's convenient and an appropriate form for my mum or someone to fill out, then she would probably help me with the form filling, I think.
Dean helps me 9 times out of 10. But if I can, I try and manage independently.
I've got a support worker that helps me, and she sees me once a week. And I've also brought in some to the Autism Hub as well that have helped me with it.
Don't like it if I receive a phone call when there's a bit of a pressured scenario, and where I'd much rather fill out an email or make a decision, not on the spot on the phone, but in my own time, when I've had time to think about it.
I find making a telephone call really stressful. I'm really self-conscious about what I say and what I'm going to say. It's another thing that I have to plan out all the time. A lot of the time I avoid doing it.
With a general sort of informal conversation with a friend or someone, that's not too hard for me.
I give a text message, but that causes its own issues because text messages can be read in different contexts.
Some of that depends on how mentally prepared I am for the telephone call and how confident I am.
It always takes me a second to pluck up the courage to answer it, and then when I'm answering it I'm always a little bit dithery to start off with until I get into the conversation. And I think it's mainly because I'm so aware of how I come across, and I'm worried that I'll come across as unintelligent or slow or something like that. So it's the prejudgment that I worry about.
I try and answer on behalf of the people that aren't around the house.
So sometimes I've missed appointments just because I won't leave an answer phone message on the phone.
Because after all the previous problems I've had with making friends and meeting new people, it's not exactly been a joyful ride.
I find meeting new people really terrifying because I automatically think that people are going to bring danger to me. I've automatically got that kind of like flight in me that I want to escape from them.
If it's just a random meeting with somebody for the first time, it's well, I think probably the less I know, the more anxious and nervous I am, really.
And I find that sometimes it feels like in my head I'm playing a board game, but I've got half the rules because I just don't understand the social interaction part of it.
It can be quite exciting. It can be quite exciting for me, but it can also be a bit hesitant about it.
I also find swearing really frightening, and a lot of people do swear every day, so that also causes issues when I meet people.
Probably the more frenetic and frantic and generally chaotic, the more frightening I find them.
In noisy places, it's hard for me to concentrate on a conversation I'm having because I'm so distracted by everything else in the room.
External noises, and if people are being a bit bullish or a bit sort of abrasive in their attitude and everything, it can make me a little bit tense in a situation.
I can hug the odd close friends, but I find physical contact hard, especially with males. So if I'm out, I won't want anyone sitting close to me on a bus or doing a gentle pat on the shoulder or anything like that, because that would just really frighten me.
When I go into band practice in Birmingham, and I think I'm generally less nervous about that now than I was. I think I was more high-strung before.
I went to a pub once and people tried to explain the same joke to me 3 times, and it was just embarrassing in the end, and I just sat there in silence instead.
I'm quite okay if it's quite sort of if I kind of know what's expected of me, if I know if it's not too sort of chaotic or unplanned, then I'm probably less anxious about being out in public.
I feel very young for my age, so if I'm with an adult conversation, sometimes I don't know what to say.
It depends on what the occasion is or what it is, because if it's like formal businessman party, I was like, hi. But if it's just like a standard social bowling evening, for example, then it's pretty easy to walk in and be like, hi, what's up? I'm here.
Also, I find it hard to know when to speak, so that takes a lot of rehearsing in my head to know when to listen and when to answer.
When we break the ice, it probably gets a bit easier as events unfold.
I find workplace really hard. I find it a really awkward and stressful environment because people give me instructions that I don't understand. They'll say it in quite a rapid manner a lot of the time because they're thinking of the next thing they need to do. And then they'll often walk off and I don't have time for them to repeat themselves.
It was work experience in a library, I think it was. I think it was generally, I think the people were generally friendly, but I wasn't, but I think I found it quite a bit of a grueling endurance.
I work in retail and the bits I find hardest is I avoid going into the staff room because I'm worried about the conversations that are going to happen, or I don't think I deserve to be there.
I'm hoping to be essentially self-employed with music.
I've also found in a workplace that some employees don't think I can hear, so they'll talk a lot louder, and they've even made me almost lip read because they think I'm completely deaf, but it's actually just because it's taken me longer. I've been bullied a lot in the workplace, mainly because people can see I'm reacting differently.
Hoping to sell my music recordings and maybe engage in a bit of guitar tuition and have some paid gigs. That's kind of my branch, really.
Yeah, I've not found working any of my jobs a positive experience, and it makes me feel quite inadequate, and I worry about going into work every day.
Very much appreciated when you put the time and the effort in to really try to connect with a person on the autistic spectrum on their wavelength.
I think that people that are female that have got autism like myself, it's a lot harder to maybe diagnose, or people don't take it as serious because I come across slightly different. So I've had comments like, oh, but you can talk and you talk to your friends, and what they don't understand is that I rehearse absolutely everything I say. So I might talk, but it's just parrot fashion, and sometimes it's what I've heard on TV or what I've rehearsed last night when I couldn't sleep because I've been that anxious about meeting someone.
One piece of advice I'd give? Yeah. Don't judge a book by its cover.
Some people say that people with autism are less emotional, whereas I think sometimes I might show emotion different, but my emotions are actually quite heightened, and I think that could be to do with having the same feelings of insecurities of a woman as well.
There needs to be some space to work at our own pace, but I do also respect the need for a sense of urgency, but more in the form of gentle encouragement.
I also think as well, I've learnt a lot about autism through watching documentaries and through reading books, but they're all basically male role models rather than female. So I think it's more publicised for a male to have autism.
Treat people with autism the same way you treat normal everyday people, but just show a bit more consideration and care.